General Vextereth had seen war across 17 different star systems. His blue-scaled hands had commanded fleets that turned entire planets to glass. His tactical mind had earned him respect among the Galactic Coalition's highest ranks. But nothing in his 300 years of military service had prepared him for what he was about to witness on a small blue world called Earth. The observation deck of the Coalition vessel Eternal Judgment hummed with activity. Dozens of military observers from across the galaxy had gathered to watch humanity's first real test. Earth had applied for Coalition membership 6 months ago, and like all species, they needed to prove their military worth through combat trials. Another primitive species, thinking they deserve a place among us, muttered Commander Zephi, her insectoid mandibles clicking with amusement. Look at their ships, metal hulls and chemical rockets. How quaint. Vextereth nodded absently, his attention focused on the tactical display. The human fleet consisted of just 12 vessels, facing off against the standard Coalition test force of automated combat drones. The test was simple: survive for 2 hours while protecting a civilian transport. Most species barely lasted 40 minutes on their first attempt. The human admiral, a female called Sarah Chun, appeared on the communication screen. She looked impossibly young to Vextereth's eyes, with short dark hair and intense brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her uniform was plain compared to the elaborate dress of Coalition officers, just dark blue fabric with simple rank insignia. Admiral Chun, Vextereth spoke into his translator unit. You may begin when ready. Remember, this is a live-fire exercise. Your ships will take real damage, and we cannot guarantee the safety of your crews. The human woman's expression didn't change. Understood, General. We're ready. Vextereth had expected nervousness, perhaps some last-minute requests for clarification of the rules. Instead, Admiral Chun simply cut the communication and turned to address her own bridge crew. The test zone was a debris field from an ancient battle, perfect for testing tactical awareness and maneuvering skills. Asteroids and dead ship hulks provided cover, but also created blind spots where enemies could hide. The Coalition drones were programmed with standard tactics used by most civilized species. Maintain formation, use superior numbers, focus fire on the largest threats first. As the countdown reached 0, Vextereth leaned forward in his observation chair. The human ships immediately broke formation in a way that made several Coalition observers gasp in shock. Instead of staying together for mutual protection, they scattered like startled fish, each vessel heading in a completely different direction. "What are they doing?" asked Colonel Murthon, his reptilian eyes blinking in confusion. "They've abandoned all tactical coherence. The drones will pick them off one by one." But something else was happening. As the human ships scattered, Vextereth noticed they weren't moving randomly. Each vessel was using the debris field differently than any species he'd observed. Where other races would navigate carefully around obstacles, the human ships were diving through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow, using gravitational slingshots around asteroids to gain speed, and even skimming along the surface of larger debris to break sensor locks. The first engagement came when 3 Coalition drones cornered a human destroyer called the Defiant. The ship was outnumbered and outgunned, trapped between 2 large asteroid fragments with no apparent escape route. Standard tactical doctrine would call for surrender at this point. Instead, the Defiant did something that made Vextereth's combat-trained mind struggle to process what he was seeing. The ship fired its main engines not away from the asteroids, but directly at one of them. The thrust pushed the ship against the asteroid's surface while simultaneously fracturing the rock. As the asteroid began to break apart, the Defiant used the explosion as cover, threading through the debris cloud while firing precisely targeted shots that disabled 2 of the 3 drones before they could react. "Impossible," whispered Colonel Murthon. "They're using environmental destruction as a tactical advantage. That requires split-second timing and computational ability beyond what their technology should allow." But Vextereth was beginning to suspect it wasn't computation at all. It was something else entirely. The battle continued, and with each passing minute, the human tactics became more incomprehensible. Ships that should have been destroyed managed to survive through maneuvers that seemed to defy both physics and sanity. A human cruiser called the Indomitable found itself facing 7 drones in open space with no cover. Instead of attempting to fight or flee, the ship shut down all power except life support and began tumbling end over end as if severely damaged. The drones, programmed to focus on active threats, ignored what appeared to be a crippled vessel and moved toward other targets. Once they had passed, the Indomitable suddenly roared back to life and attacked them from behind, destroying 4 drones before they could turn around. They're lying to the enemy," said Commander HFY, her voice filled with something approaching horror. "Deliberately deceiving opponents in combat. This is completely outside standard tactical parameters." Vexterith found himself studying Admiral Chen's face on the communication screen. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes moved constantly, processing information faster than seemed possible for an organic brain. She wasn't just commanding 12 ships. She was thinking like 12 different captains simultaneously, predicting not just what her own forces would do, but what the enemy would think she would do, and then doing something else entirely. The human fleet's coordination was unlike anything in Coalition tactical manuals. Ships would separate for no apparent reason, then, suddenly, converge from multiple angles to overwhelm isolated drone groups. They shared information instantaneously, but more than that, they seemed to share intent. When one ship began a maneuver, others would anticipate the plan and move to support it before any communication could have taken place. 30 minutes into the battle, the Coalition drones had lost over half their number while only managing to destroy 2 human vessels. The Eternal Judgment's tactical computer began running probability calculations and returned results that made no mathematical sense. "General," his aide whispered, "the computer estimates that the humans are operating at 340% tactical efficiency compared to baseline Coalition species. It's requesting permission to run additional diagnostics because it believes there's an error in the sensors." Vexterith knew there was no error. What he was seeing was a species that approached warfare from a fundamentally different perspective than every other race in the galaxy. Coalition tactics were based on logical principles: maintain superior firepower, hold advantageous positions, minimize risks through careful planning. Human tactics seemed based on something else entirely. They took risks that should have been suicidal, but somehow made them work. They turned disadvantages into advantages through pure audacity. When their ships took damage, instead of retreating to repair, they found ways to use the damage itself as a weapon. The Defiant, now missing its entire port side from asteroid impacts, had somehow turned a massive hole in its hull into an improvised missile launcher. Debris from its own destroyed sections was being fired at enemy drones with devastating effect. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "Admiral Chun is requesting permission to attempt rescue of the civilian transport." Vexterith blinked. In all the chaos of watching impossible tactics, he had forgotten about the primary objective. The civilian transport was still holding position in the center of the debris field, protected by just 2 human escorts while the rest of the fleet engaged the drones. "The test parameters state that you must survive for 2 hours while keeping the transport safe," Vexterith replied. "You still have 93 minutes remaining." Admiral Chen's smile was barely visible on the screen, but it sent an unexpected chill down Vexterith's spine. "With respect, General, I believe we can complete the mission early." Before he could ask what she meant, the human fleet suddenly changed its entire tactical approach. The scattered ships began converging on the transport's position, but not in any defensive formation he recognized. Instead, they were forming something that looked almost like a biological organism, with the transport at its center and the military vessels arranged around it like protective organs. The remaining Coalition drones, following their programming, moved to intercept this new formation. As they approached, Vexterith realized what Admiral Chun was planning. She wasn't just protecting the transport. She was using it as bait to draw all remaining enemies into a single engagement where her scattered ships could attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The final battle lasted less than 10 minutes. The human fleet moved like a single living creature, each ship perfectly positioned to support the others. Drones that tried to attack from one angle found themselves caught in crossfire from 3 other directions. Those that attempted to withdraw discovered their escape routes had been quietly blocked by ships that had somehow moved into position without being detected. When the last drone was destroyed, Admiral Chen's voice came through the communications system with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the entire engagement. Mission complete, General. Civilian transport secured. All objectives achieved. We await your evaluation. The observation deck was completely silent. Vexterith looked around at his fellow officers and saw his own shock reflected in their faces. In 47 minutes, these humans had not only passed their combat trial, but had done so in a way that challenged every fundamental assumption about how space warfare was supposed to work. Admiral Chun, Vexterith said slowly, that was most impressive. However, standard procedure requires a full tactical analysis before we can approve Earth's application for coalition membership. We will need time to review the engagement data. What he didn't say was that he needed time to figure out how to explain to the Coalition High Command that they had just witnessed a species whose military capabilities might exceed their own. The humans had used tactics that weren't just effective, they were revolutionary. Tactics that could potentially render thousands of years of Coalition military doctrine obsolete. As the human fleet formed up to depart, Vexterith found himself studying the tactical recordings with growing unease. These humans didn't fight like any civilized species. They fought like something wild and unpredictable, something that had learned warfare not from military academies, but from a need to survive against impossible odds. His aide approached with a datapad containing preliminary analysis results. Sir, the combat efficiency ratings are unlike anything in our databases. The humans achieved victory against numerical superiority using tactics that our computers classify as mathematically improbable and logically inconsistent with survival instincts. Vexterith set down the pad and looked out at the debris field where the battle had taken place. Scattered among the destroyed Coalition drones were pieces of human ships, vessels that had been damaged, battered, and, in some cases, nearly destroyed, but whose crews had kept fighting until the very end. That's when he realized what had unsettled him so deeply about the entire engagement. It wasn't just that the humans had won. It was that they had enjoyed it. Throughout the entire battle, their communications had remained calm, professional, almost cheerful. They had faced overwhelming odds and mortal danger with the kind of enthusiasm that most species reserved for recreational activities. What kind of species treated warfare like a sport? As the Eternal Judgment prepared to jump back to Coalition space, Vexterith made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of filing the standard tactical report, he submitted a request for extended observation of human military capabilities. He told himself it was his duty as a Coalition general to understand this new potential threat. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. He wasn't afraid of the humans. He was fascinated by them, and that fascination was about to lead him down a path he never could have imagined. 3 weeks later, General Vexterith stood in the Coalition War College's primary briefing chamber, facing 200 of the galaxy's most experienced military officers. The holographic display showed detailed analysis of the human combat trial, but the numbers on screen seemed to confuse rather than clarify what they had witnessed. The efficiency ratings must be incorrect, declared Admiral Korthvel, his massive form looming over the conference table. The Draknari were known throughout the galaxy for their methodical approach to warfare, and Korthvel had never lost a battle in his 4th-century career. No species achieves 340% tactical efficiency without superior technology or overwhelming numbers. Marshal Yithsera, her crystalline body refracting light as she moved, added her concerns. The recorded maneuvers violate basic principles of military science. Ships cannot survive the gravitational stresses shown in these recordings. Their hulls should have been torn apart. Vexterith had heard these objections for days now from every coalition military leader who had reviewed the engagement data. None of them could accept what the sensors had recorded, because accepting it meant acknowledging that their own understanding of warfare might be fundamentally flawed. The data has been verified multiple times, Vexterith responded, his voice carefully neutral. 3 independent sensor arrays recorded identical results. The human tactical performance is accurate. General Kexmoth, speaking through his translation unit in the clicking language of his species, raised what everyone was thinking. If these humans are as capable as the data suggests, they represent a potential threat to coalition security. Perhaps Earth's membership application should be reconsidered. The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood the implications of Kexmoth's words. Species that pose threats to coalition stability were typically dealt with through containment or, in extreme cases, military action. The thought of humanity facing the combined might of a 1,000-world alliance made even veteran warriors uncomfortable. But something in Vexterith rebelled against that suggestion. Over the past 3 weeks, he had studied every detail of the human engagement, watching the tactical recordings until he could predict each ship's movements. What he had seen wasn't aggression or conquest-minded thinking. It was something far more complex. "I request permission to conduct additional observations," Vexterith said, interrupting the growing murmur of conversation. "Before making any decisions about Earth's membership status, we should understand exactly what we're dealing with." The Supreme Military Commander, an ancient being whose species name was unpronounceable to most others, fixed Vexterith with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "Explain your reasoning, General." Vexterith activated his personal data pad, displaying footage from the human battle. Notice here, when the human destroyer was surrounded by 3 drones. Standard coalition doctrine would focus on destroying the enemy vessels. But watch what the humans actually do. The recording showed the Defiant during its asteroid maneuver, but Vexterith had isolated specific communication channels. The ship's crew was coordinating not just their own survival, but actively trying to minimize damage to the coalition drones while still completing their mission objectives. They could have destroyed all 3 drones with focused fire, Vexterith explained. Their weapons were capable of it. Instead, they used precisely calculated strikes to disable rather than destroy. Throughout the entire engagement, human forces consistently chose non-lethal solutions when possible. Marshal Ythsera's crystalline form shifted, creating prismatic light patterns that indicated deep thought among her species. "You're suggesting they were showing restraint during a combat trial?" "I'm suggesting they approach warfare differently than we do," Vexterith replied. "Look at this communication intercept from Admiral Chen's flagship." Audio filled the chamber, translated into each officer's native language. Admiral Chen's voice was calm, professional, but there was something else underneath, a tone that most coalition officers couldn't quite identify. "All ships, remember we're guests here. Keep collateral damage to minimum and watch your fire discipline. These drones are probably expensive, and we don't want to make a bad first impression." The chamber erupted in confused discussion. Several officers began speaking at once, their translation units creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Admiral Korthvel's bass rumble cut through the noise. She was concerned about the cost of enemy equipment during a combat trial that could determine her species' future. This makes no tactical sense whatsoever. But Vexterith was beginning to understand something that had eluded him during the initial observation. Human military thinking wasn't just different from coalition doctrine, it operated on entirely different principles. Where coalition species separated military objectives from civilian concerns, humans seemed incapable of making that distinction. "I've been studying human historical records," Vexterith continued, calling up additional displays. "Their planet has experienced continuous warfare for thousands of years, but their military development follows patterns unlike any other species we've encountered." The hologram showed human military evolution across centuries. Unlike coalition species, which typically developed warfare through conquest and expansion, human military advancement seemed driven by protection and survival. Their tactics emphasized adaptability, resourcefulness, and minimizing casualties among both their own forces and civilian populations. They fight like a species that has never known true peace, observed Colonel Murthon, but their tactical priorities suggest they desperately want it. General Kexmatha's translation unit clicked rapidly as he processed this information. Are you suggesting that humans wage war in order to end war? That seems contradictory. Before Vextereth could respond, an aide hurried into the chamber with an urgent communication. Generals, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Chun is requesting immediate consultation regarding a situation in their home system. The main display shifted to show Admiral Chen's face, but her usual composure was strained. Behind her, Vextereth could see increased activity on her ship's bridge, with crew members moving with a focused urgency that indicated a developing crisis. Coalition Command, this is Admiral Chun requesting assistance under Article 7 of the Membership Accords. We have detected an unidentified fleet moving toward Earth space. Configuration and energy signatures don't match any known human technology. The chamber went completely silent. Article 7 covered situations where applicant species faced external threats during their membership evaluation period. Technically, the Coalition was obligated to provide protection, but no one had expected Earth to need it so quickly. Supreme Commander spoke for the first time during the briefing, his ancient voice carrying absolute authority. Admiral Chun, transmit all available data on this unidentified fleet. Coalition vessels in your sector will investigate immediately. As tactical data began streaming from Earth, Vextereth felt something cold settle in his stomachs. The unknown fleet consisted of 47 vessels, each significantly larger than anything in Earth's military. Their technology signatures indicated advanced energy weapons, particle shields, and faster-than-light capabilities that exceeded even Coalition standards. Worse, their course and approach vectors suggested they weren't interested in communication. They were heading directly for Earth at maximum speed, with weapon systems already powered and shields raised for combat. "Sir," whispered his aide, "our nearest fleet is 6 days away at maximum jump speed. Even if we dispatch them immediately, they couldn't reach Earth before the unknown vessels arrive." Admiral Chen seemed to have heard this assessment through her own channels, because her next words made several Coalition officers exchange worried glances. "Understood, Coalition Command. We appreciate any assistance you can provide. In the meantime, we'll handle things on our end." Admiral Chen out. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Marshal Yithsera was the first to speak, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. She's planning to engage 47 advanced vessels with a 12-ship fleet? That's not courage, that's suicide. But Vextereth was remembering the tactical recordings from 3 weeks ago, and Admiral Chen's calm voice as she faced overwhelming odds. Something told him that humanity was about to demonstrate exactly why they deserved Coalition membership, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. "General," the Supreme Commander addressed him directly, "you requested additional observation of human capabilities. It appears you'll have your opportunity much sooner than expected. Take the Eternal Judgment to Earth immediately. Observe and report on human response to this crisis." As Vextereth acknowledged his orders and prepared to depart, he found himself wondering exactly what he was about to witness. The unknown fleet heading for Earth was larger and more advanced than anything humanity had faced before. By all logical calculations, Earth's defense should be hopeless. But he was beginning to suspect that logic might not apply where humans were concerned. During the 6-hour jump to Earth space, Vextereth studied everything the Coalition databases contained about humanity's military history. What he found both fascinated and disturbed him. Humans had a documented tendency to achieve victory in battles they should have lost, often through tactics that their own military historians described as desperate or impossible. The Battle of Britain, where a small air force held off a much larger invasion fleet. The defense of Stalingrad, where soldiers fought building by building against overwhelming odds. Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held a mountain pass against an army of thousands. Each example showed the same pattern. Humans facing impossible odds, finding ways to turn disadvantages into strengths, and refusing to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. It wasn't just military skill, it was something deeper, something that seemed built into their species at a fundamental level. When the Eternal Judgment dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, Vexterith immediately understood why Admiral Chun had seemed so calm during their earlier communication. The human defense wasn't hopeless at all. It was exactly the kind of situation where humanity appeared to excel. Earth's entire space-capable fleet had assembled between the approaching enemy and their home planet. But they weren't arranged in standard defensive formations. Instead, they were spread throughout the inner solar system in what appeared to be a completely chaotic deployment. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "human vessels are positioned near asteroid mining stations, orbital manufacturing platforms, and space elevators. They appear to be using civilian infrastructure as defensive positions." Vexterith frowned as he studied the deployment patterns. To Coalition eyes, it looked like humanity was using their own people as shields, which would be both tactically unsound and ethically questionable. But as he watched human ships moving through the civilian traffic, he began to see something else entirely. They weren't hiding behind civilians. They were protecting them. Every human military vessel was positioned to defend multiple civilian targets simultaneously. If the enemy wanted to reach Earth, they would have to fight their way through not just the human military, but an entire civilization that refused to be conquered. The unknown fleet had dropped out of hyperspace at the solar system's edge and was advancing steadily toward the inner planets. Long-range scans confirmed Vexterith's fears. These vessels were significantly more advanced than anything Earth possessed. Their weapons could destroy human ships at ranges where humans couldn't even target them effectively. As the two forces approached engagement range, Admiral Chen's voice came through communication channels, addressing her own fleet with the same calm professionalism Vexterith had observed before. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Our visitors don't seem interested in talking, which saves us the trouble of small talk. Remember your training, watch your spacing, and let's show them what Earth hospitality looks like." Combat Deployment Alpha 7 is now in effect. Vexterith had no idea what Combat Deployment Alpha 7 meant, but he was about to find out. As the human fleet began to move, he realized that what he had thought was chaotic positioning was actually the most sophisticated defensive strategy he had ever witnessed. The humans weren't planning to meet the enemy in open battle. They were turning their entire solar system into a weapon. The unknown fleet entered Earth's outer solar system with the confidence of predators approaching helpless prey. Vexterith watched from the Eternal Judgment as 47 advanced warships moved in perfect formation, their energy signatures indicating weapons that could glass entire continents. Their leader finally opened communication channels, and the voice that emerged made Vexterith's scales ripple with recognition. He knew that species, the hegemony of Korth, a militaristic empire that had been expanding aggressively along coalition borders for decades. "Primitive humans," the voice proclaimed through translation matrices. "I am War Master Thekvar of the Korth hegemony. Your world will be claimed for the hegemony. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." Admiral Chen's response came immediately, her voice carrying a tone that Vexterith had never heard from her before. Not anger, exactly, but something colder and far more dangerous. "War Master Thekvar, this is Admiral Sarachun of Earth Defense Force. You are not welcome in our system. Turn around and leave peacefully, or we'll send you home in pieces small enough to fit in an envelope." The Korth War Master's laughter boomed through the communication channels. Brave words from dead people. You have 12 ships against my 47. Your technology is centuries behind ours. What do you think you can accomplish against the might of the hegemony? There was a pause before Admiral Chun responded, and when she did, Vexterith detected something in her voice that made his combat instincts go on high alert. It was the same tone he had heard from predators just before they struck. War Master, you're about to learn why humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Earth Defense Force out. The communication cut, and immediately the human fleet began implementing combat deployment Alpha 7. What followed challenged everything Vexterith thought he knew about space warfare. Instead of forming traditional battle lines, human ships scattered throughout the inner solar system like seeds on the wind. But their movement wasn't random. It was precisely coordinated with civilian infrastructure that had suddenly transformed into something else entirely. Asteroid mining stations began moving under their own power, their industrial equipment reconfiguring into weapons platforms. Orbital manufacturing facilities started producing and launching swarms of small craft that were too numerous for the Korth sensors to track individually. Space elevators became massive railguns, using their own structure to accelerate projectiles to incredible velocities. Impossible, breathed his tactical officer. Sir, the humans have militarized their entire civilization in less than 6 hours. Every civilian installation in the system is now a potential weapons platform. But Vexterith was watching something even more remarkable on his long-range sensors. Human civilians weren't fleeing or hiding. They were actively participating in the defense. Cargo haulers were positioning themselves to create sensor shadows from military vessels. Passenger ships were using their communication arrays to jam Korth targeting systems. Even small private craft were contributing, creating a sensor network that gave human forces real-time information on enemy movements throughout the entire solar system. The first engagement came when a squadron of Korth vessels moved to destroy what appeared to be a defenseless mining station. As they approached, the station's industrial lasers suddenly swiveled to track the incoming ships. What had been designed to cut through asteroid rock proved surprisingly effective against military armor. But the real surprise came when the mining station revealed itself to be 3 human destroyers that had been linked together and disguised with civilian sensor signatures. The Korth squadron found themselves under attack from multiple directions by ships they hadn't even known were there. They're using deception warfare on a system-wide scale, Vexterith muttered, studying the tactical display with growing amazement. Every sensor contact could be either civilian infrastructure or a hidden military vessel. The Korth fleet's response was predictably aggressive. War Master Thekvar ordered his forces to destroy everything in the system, military and civilian alike. If they couldn't distinguish between threats and non-combatants, they would simply eliminate both. It was exactly what Admiral Chun had been counting on. As Korth vessels began firing indiscriminately at civilian targets, they discovered that destroying harmless infrastructure had unexpected consequences. A cargo depot that exploded under Korth fire turned out to have been filled with military-grade explosives, creating a blast that damaged 3 nearby Korth ships. A communications relay that seemed like an easy target was actually connected to a network of similar relays, and its destruction triggered a cascade failure that blinded Korth sensors throughout an entire sector. Sir, his communications officer called out, we're receiving tactical data from human sources. They're sharing their defensive information with us. Vexterith looked at the incoming data stream in surprise. Admiral Chun was providing the Coalition observation vessel with real-time intelligence on human defensive capabilities, including detailed explanations of their tactical doctrines. It was an unprecedented level of military transparency. The attached message was typically direct. General Vexterith, since you're observing anyway, you might as well understand what you're seeing. Consider this a practical demonstration of human defensive strategy. Admiral Chun, as Vexterith studied the tactical data, he began to understand the true scope of human military thinking. What appeared to be chaotic improvisation was actually the result of decades of careful planning. Earth had been preparing for exactly this kind of invasion since their first contact with galactic civilization. Every human civilian had basic military training. Every piece of infrastructure had been designed with dual-use capabilities. Every citizen knew their role in planetary defense. The Korth weren't fighting just a military. They were fighting an entire civilization that had organized itself around the principle of armed resistance. The battle shifted dramatically when human forces revealed their true tactical innovation. Instead of fighting as individual ships, they began operating as a distributed organism spread across the entire solar system. Ships that were light years apart coordinated their attacks with split-second timing. Industrial facilities provided covering fire for military vessels. Civilian craft served as mobile sensor platforms, communication relays, and even impromptu weapons. This is beyond anything in coalition tactical doctrine, Vexterith whispered, watching as a human cargo ship successfully rammed a Korth cruiser, using its industrial construction to punch through military-grade armor. They've turned their entire solar system into a single, integrated weapons platform. The Korth were beginning to realize they had made a serious miscalculation. War Master Thekvar's confident advance had turned into a desperate fight for survival as his forces found themselves surrounded by enemies they couldn't predict or counter. Every tactic they tried was met by human responses that seemed designed specifically to exploit Korth weaknesses. When Korth forces concentrated their fire, humans scattered and attacked from unexpected angles. When Korth ships spread out to cover more area, humans focused their attacks to achieve local superiority. When the Korth tried to withdraw to regroup, they discovered that human forces had quietly moved to block their escape routes. But what truly unsettled Vexterith was how the humans fought with such devastating effectiveness while maintaining strict rules of engagement. Even as Korth vessels attacked civilian targets, human forces continued to offer quarter to enemies who surrendered. They provided medical assistance to damaged Korth ships whose life support had failed. They went out of their way to minimize unnecessary casualties, even among an enemy that had shown no such restraint. "Sir," his medical officer reported, "we're receiving distress signals from several damaged Korth vessels. The humans they're offering medical assistance to their enemies." On the main display, Vexterith watched as human medical ships approached damaged Korth vessels under flags of truce. The Korth, trained for total warfare, seemed completely unprepared for this kind of humanitarian behavior during active combat. Some Korth commanders, recognizing the hopelessness of their situation, actually accepted human medical aid. Others, either from pride or confusion, continued fighting even as their ships fell apart around them. Admiral Chen's voice came through communication channels, addressing the entire Korth fleet with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the engagement. "War Master Thekvar, you've lost 18 ships, and your remaining forces are scattered across our system with no clear chain of command. We're offering you one final chance to surrender and receive medical attention for your wounded. Otherwise, we'll continue this demonstration until your fleet no longer exists." The reply came in the form of a massive energy discharge as War Master Thekvar's flagship directed all power to its primary weapon, attempting to destroy Earth's primary orbital platform. The beam struck its target with enough energy to boil oceans, and for a moment Vexterith thought the humans had finally been outmatched. Then, the orbital platform revealed itself to be an elaborately disguised holographic projection. The real platform, hidden among civilian traffic on the far side of the planet, responded with a railgun projectile that traveled at a significant fraction of light speed. War Master Thekvar's flagship simply ceased to exist. The remaining Korth vessels, witnessing the destruction of their command ship and the death of their leader, finally acknowledged reality. One by one, they transmitted surrender codes and powered down their weapons. Admiral Chen's response was immediate and characteristic. "Understood. All surrendering vessels will receive medical assistance, and safe passage to the nearest neutral port. Any Korth personnel requiring emergency medical attention should signal immediately. As the battle ended, and human medical ships moved to assist their former enemies, Vextereth found himself staring at tactical recordings that would change military doctrine throughout the galaxy. Humanity had not just won a defensive battle. They had revolutionized the very concept of what defense meant. "Sir," his aide approached with a communication pad, "Admiral Chun is requesting permission to come aboard and debrief Coalition observers on human defensive capabilities." Vextereth nodded absently, his mind still processing what he had witnessed. When Admiral Chun arrived on the Eternal Judgment an hour later, she looked exactly as composed as she had during the combat trial 3 weeks earlier. Only the slight fatigue around her eyes suggested she had just commanded one of the most innovative military operations in galactic history. "General Vextereth," she said, offering a very human gesture of greeting. "I hope our little demonstration was informative." "Admiral Chun," Vextereth replied, "that was the most remarkable display of defensive strategy one have ever witnessed. Your casualties were minimal, your tactical efficiency was extraordinary, and your adherence to humanitarian principles even during combat was." He paused, searching for the right words. "Completely insane by galactic standards," Admiral Chun suggested with a slight smile. "Revolutionary," Vextereth corrected. "You've proven that military superiority isn't just about advanced technology or numerical advantage. You've shown that a properly motivated and organized civilization can defend itself against almost any threat." Admiral Chen's expression grew more serious. "General, what you witnessed today is what happens when an entire species refuses to accept conquest. Every human in this system knew that surrender meant the end of our way of life. So we chose to fight with everything we had, using every advantage we could create." As they talked, Vextereth realized something that would change his life forever. These humans hadn't just impressed him with their military capabilities. They had shown him a completely different way of thinking about war, peace, and the responsibility of those who possess the power to protect others. For the first time in his 3 centuries of military service, Vextereth began to question whether the Coalition's approach to galactic security was truly the best path forward. The Coalition War College's emergency session was unlike anything in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives from every major military species had gathered to review General Vextereth's report on the human defense of Earth, and the reactions ranged from disbelief to outright fear. 47 advanced Korth vessels defeated by 12 primitive ships and civilian infrastructure. Admiral Korthvel's massive frame trembled with what might have been rage or confusion. "Either your sensors were completely compromised, General, or these humans represent a threat to galactic stability that must be addressed immediately." Supreme Military Commander raised one ancient appendage, silencing the growing murmur of agreement. "General Vextereth, present your complete analysis." Vextereth activated the main display, showing tactical recordings that still seemed impossible even after weeks of study. The human victory was achieved through integration of military and civilian resources on a scale we've never documented. Every human citizen is effectively a potential combatant, every piece of infrastructure a possible weapon. Marshal Yithsera's crystalline body flickered with nervous light patterns. "You're describing a completely militarized society. That level of organization should require authoritarian control that stifles innovation and individual freedom. Yet our cultural analysis suggests Earth maintains democratic principles and personal liberty. That's what makes them so remarkable," Vextereth replied, calling up additional data. "They've achieved total defense integration without sacrificing the values they're defending. Every human knows their role in planetary defense, but they participate voluntarily, driven by shared commitment to their civilization's survival." General Kexmatha's translation unit clicked rapidly. "This suggests humans view military service differently than other species. For most races, warfare is separate from civilian life. You're saying humans see no distinction? Before Vexterith could respond, an aide rushed into the chamber with urgent communication equipment. Generals, priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Chun reports another crisis developing. The main display shifted to show Admiral Chen's familiar face, but her usual composure showed strain. Behind her, Vexterith could see increased activity on her ship's bridge, with officers coordinating responses to multiple simultaneous situations. Coalition Command. This is Admiral Chun reporting a developing humanitarian crisis in the Tau Ceti system. We've received distress signals from the colony world New Geneva, which is experiencing catastrophic seismic activity. Their evacuation capabilities are insufficient for their population of 1.2 million colonists. Supreme Commander spoke immediately. Admiral, Tau Ceti is outside Coalition space. New Geneva is an independent colony with no formal defense agreements. Understood, sir, Admiral Chen replied. However, they're requesting assistance under interstellar humanitarian protocols. The situation will become critical within 72 hours. Vexterith felt his stomach clench as he recognized the political implications. New Geneva was located in disputed space between Coalition territory and the aggressive hegemony of Korth. Any Coalition military intervention could be seen as territorial expansion, potentially triggering a larger conflict. Admiral, Supreme Commander continued, Coalition policy prohibits military intervention in neutral systems without unanimous Council approval. Such approval would require extensive debate and could not be granted within your time frame. The chamber fell silent as everyone understood what this meant. 1.2 million people would die while the Coalition followed proper diplomatic procedures. Admiral Chen's response surprised no one who had studied human behavior. Understood, Coalition Command. Earth Defense Force will proceed with humanitarian mission under our own authority. We'll notify you of our progress. Admiral Chen out. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Marshal Yithsera was the first to speak, her voice filled with something approaching horror. She's planning to violate neutral space with military vessels to rescue people who aren't even her own species? That could trigger war with the Korth hegemony. But Vexterith was studying tactical displays of the Tau Ceti system, and what he saw made his veteran instincts go on high alert. New Geneva's location was strategically critical. Whoever controlled that system would have a significant advantage in future conflicts. If humanity successfully evacuated the colonists, they would likely establish a permanent presence in the region. General, his aide whispered, long-range sensors show Korth naval elements moving toward Tau Ceti from 3 different vectors. They're not heading for New Geneva to provide assistance. The implication was clear. The Korth hegemony was using the humanitarian crisis as an opportunity to claim the Tau Ceti system for themselves. Any human rescue mission would likely encounter significant Korth military opposition. Supreme Commander's ancient voice carried deep concern. General Vexterith, you've observed human capabilities more than any other Coalition officer. What is your assessment of their chances in this situation? Vexterith studied the available data carefully. The human fleet heading for Tau Ceti consisted of just 8 ships, their fastest vessels capable of making the journey within the required time frame. Intelligence reports suggested at least 30 Korth ships were converging on the same system. Based on conventional tactical analysis, Vexterith said slowly, the humans face impossible odds. 8 ships against 30, operating far from any support, attempting to conduct evacuation operations while under enemy fire. And based on unconventional analysis, asked Supreme Commander. Vexterith thought back to everything he had witnessed during Earth's defense. I believe the humans are about to teach the galaxy another lesson about the difference between impossible and difficult. The Coalition leadership spent the next 18 hours monitoring human progress toward Tau Ceti while debating appropriate responses. Some advocated immediate military support for the humanitarian mission, while others argued that Earth's unauthorized intervention violated interstellar law and should not be endorsed. Vexterith found himself increasingly frustrated with the political discussions as reports came in from Tau Ceti. The first human ships had arrived to find New Geneva in chaos, with massive earthquakes causing widespread destruction. Worse, Korth vessels had already established positions in the outer system, effectively blockading any escape routes. When Admiral Chen's next transmission arrived, it was broadcast on general channels, ensuring every military leader in the galaxy could observe human operations. Coalition Command, this is Admiral Chen reporting from Tau Ceti. We've established contact with New Geneva authorities and begun emergency evacuation procedures. However, Korth naval forces are demanding we withdraw from the system and abandon the colonists. The main display showed tactical feeds from the human fleet. 8 ships were operating around New Geneva like a precision instrument, with evacuation craft shuttling continuously between the planet's surface and transport vessels. Meanwhile, 30 Korth warships maintained positions that prevented any evacuated civilians from leaving the system. Supreme Commander addressed Admiral Chen directly. Admiral, the Coalition cannot provide military support for your operations. You're operating beyond our jurisdiction and against significant opposition. Admiral Chen's response demonstrated the fundamental difference between human and Coalition thinking. Understood, sir. We don't need military support. We need you to witness what happens when civilized people choose to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. What followed was the most remarkable display of tactical innovation Vexterith had ever witnessed. Admiral Chen didn't attempt to fight the Korth blockade. Instead, she turned the humanitarian mission itself into a weapon. Human evacuation procedures were broadcast on all channels, ensuring every species in the galaxy could observe Korth forces preventing the rescue of innocent civilians. When Korth commanders demanded the humans withdraw, Admiral Chen responded by increasing evacuation efforts and requesting that all galactic news services send observers to document the situation. She's fighting a propaganda war, breathed General Kexmoth, making it impossible for the Korth to attack without appearing to be monsters who prevent civilian rescues. But Vexterith realized Admiral Chen's strategy went deeper than mere propaganda. Every minute the standoff continued, more civilians were safely evacuated from New Geneva. The Korth were trapped between their desire to claim the system and their unwillingness to be seen actively preventing humanitarian operations. War Master Vec Tang, commanding the Korth blockade, finally lost patience with the situation. His transmission to Admiral Chen was broadcast galaxy-wide, ensuring maximum exposure for his ultimatum. Human Admiral, you will cease operations and withdraw immediately. The Tau Ceti system is claimed by the Korth hegemony under right of conquest. Any continued interference will be met with military force. Admiral Chen's response was calm, professional, and devastating in its simplicity. War Master Vec Tang, I'm broadcasting on all channels so the entire galaxy can hear this clearly. We are conducting humanitarian evacuation of civilians facing natural disaster. If you attack ships engaged in saving lives, every species in known space will understand exactly what the Korth hegemony represents. The choice is yours. The standoff continued for another 6 hours, with human evacuation craft continuing their rescue operations while Korth warships maintained their blockade. But something unexpected was happening throughout the galaxy. Other species were beginning to respond to the crisis. Coalition communication channels lit up with messages from hundreds of worlds expressing support for the human mission. Independent merchant fleets began moving toward Tau Ceti to assist with evacuation efforts. Even some coalition military units requested permission to provide humanitarian aid. Most significantly, several Korth naval officers began transmitting private messages questioning their orders to prevent civilian rescues. The Korth military tradition emphasized honor in combat, and many Korth warriors were uncomfortable with preventing life-saving operations. The crisis reached its climax when New Geneva's primary continental plate began catastrophic shifting that would kill hundreds of thousands of people within hours. Admiral Chen's response was characteristically direct. All ships, emergency acceleration of evacuation procedures. We're going to save every life we can, regardless of Korth interference. If they want to stop us, they'll have to fire on evacuation craft filled with civilian refugees. As human ships moved into extreme danger zones to rescue colonists from the most affected areas, War Master Vectang faced an impossible decision. He could order his forces to fire on humanitarian vessels, marking the Korth hegemony as a civilization that murdered rescue workers and refugees. Or he could allow the humans to continue their operations, effectively ceding Tau Ceti system control. His choice revealed something Vextereth had begun to suspect about the true nature of galactic politics. When forced to choose between tactical advantage and basic decency, even aggressive species like the Korth had limits they wouldn't cross. All Korth vessels, War Master Vectang's transmission was audible throughout the system. Maintain current positions but do not interfere with humanitarian operations. Any human vessel carrying evacuees will be granted safe passage. By the time New Geneva's final evacuation craft reached orbit, Admiral Chun had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. She had successfully challenged a major military power's territorial claims without firing a shot, using humanitarian principles as weapons more effective than any energy cannon. As the last human ship prepared to leave Tau Ceti with 1.2 million rescued colonists, Admiral Chin's final transmission was addressed not just to Coalition Command, but to every military leader who had observed the operation. This is Admiral Chun to all observing forces. Today you witnessed what humans mean when we talk about defending our values. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with weapons. They're won by refusing to compromise on principles that make civilization worth preserving. Watching the human fleet depart with their rescued civilians, Vextereth realized he had just witnessed the future of galactic politics. Humanity hadn't just demonstrated superior military capabilities. They had shown how moral authority could be more powerful than conventional force. For the first time in his long career, General Vextereth began to question whether he was fighting for the right side. General Vextereth stood in his personal quarters aboard the Eternal Judgment, staring at a formal document that would end his 3-century military career. His resignation from coalition forces lay on his desk, requiring only his authorization seal to become official. The past month had been a whirlwind of debriefings, tactical analyses, and heated debates about humanity's place in galactic civilization. Earth's membership application had been approved unanimously after their demonstration at Tau Ceti, but the implications of human military doctrine were causing upheaval throughout coalition space. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Admiral Chen's face appeared on his personal communication screen, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked genuinely tired. General Vextereth, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to speak privately before you made your final decision about the Coalition's offer. Vextereth was surprised she knew about the offer. Coalition High Command had approached him 3 days ago with an unprecedented proposition: command of a new joint species fleet incorporating human tactical innovations. It would mean promotion to Supreme Admiral and authority over the largest military force in galactic history. Admiral Chun, he replied, I'm honored that you're aware of the situation, but I confess I'm uncertain how to proceed. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. May I ask what's troubling you about the position? Command of a joint fleet would allow you to implement the tactical innovations you've observed. You could change how the entire galaxy approaches military doctrine. Vextereth touched the resignation document on his desk. That's precisely the problem. I've spent my entire career believing that military force existed to maintain order and protect coalition interests. But watching your people, I've begun to question whether our definition of order is worth preserving. There was a long pause before Chen responded. General, would you be willing to visit Earth? Not as a military observer, but as a guest. I think you might benefit from seeing what we're actually fighting to protect. The suggestion was highly irregular. Coalition officers rarely visited member worlds except on official business, and never for personal reasons. But Something in Chin's tone suggested this wasn't casual tourism she was proposing. What did you have in mind, Admiral? My family runs a small farm in what used to be called Iowa. Nothing strategically important, just corn and soybeans and a few head of cattle. But it might help you understand why humans approach warfare differently than other species. Vextereth found himself intrigued despite his reservations. You're suggesting that agricultural knowledge would influence my military decision-making? Chin's smile was gentle, but somehow profound. I'm suggesting that understanding what you're defending changes how you defend it. Come see what human civilization actually looks like when we're not fighting for our lives. 2 weeks later, General Vextereth found himself standing in a cornfield on Earth, wearing civilian clothes that felt strange after centuries in military uniform. The experience was surreal. He was one of the most senior military officers in galactic civilization, and he was learning how to milk cows from Admiral Chin's 12-year-old nephew. The trick is to be gentle but firm, explained Marcus, showing no concern that he was instructing a being who commanded starfleets. Bessie's been doing this for years, so she knows what to expect. Just don't make any sudden movements. Admiral Chun watched from nearby, dressed in work clothes and looking completely relaxed for the first time since Vextereth had met her. Her transformation from military commander to farm visitor was remarkable. The same person who had faced impossible odds in space was now helping her sister repair a fence that kept nothing more dangerous than chickens contained. This is what confused me during your tactical analysis, Chun said, hammering a fence post with practiced efficiency. Coalition observers kept trying to understand human military doctrine by studying our weapons and formations. But our military capability comes from what we're defending, not how we fight. Vextereth successfully extracted milk from Bessie while pondering this statement. Around him, the Chun family farm bustled with activity that had nothing to do with warfare. Children played games in the yard, while adults worked on various projects. Neighbors stopped by to borrow tools or share news. The atmosphere was peaceful in a way that Vextereth had never experienced. Every person here could be a soldier if necessary, Chun continued, but being soldiers isn't what makes them worth defending. It's everything else, their curiosity, their creativity, their connections to each other. Military training just ensures they can protect those qualities when threatened. That evening, sitting around a dinner table with 3 generations of Chin's family, Vextereth began to understand something that had eluded him throughout his military career. These humans weren't warriors who occasionally acted civilized. They were fundamentally civilian people who could become warriors when necessary. Marcus, the boy who had taught him to milk cows, was also fluent in 3 languages and building a computer from salvage parts. Chin's sister was a biochemist whose research had potential military applications, but she was more excited about using it to improve crop yields. Her husband was a former military pilot who now taught flight safety to civilian pilots. In coalition space, Vextereth observed, military and civilian populations are typically separate. Professional soldiers handle defense, while civilians focus on their specialized roles. That approach works when threats are external and predictable, Chin's father replied. He was a retired teacher who had served briefly in Earth's defense forces. But humans learned long ago that the most dangerous threats often come from our own species. Everyone needs to understand both creation and destruction. After dinner, Chun took Vextereth for a walk through the local town. What he saw there challenged every assumption about human society that coalition intelligence had developed. The same children who played peacefully in parks also practiced emergency procedures with the competence of trained soldiers. Adults who spent their days teaching or farming or conducting scientific research also maintained equipment that could be rapidly converted to military use. Your entire civilization is designed for resilience, Vextereth observed. But not just military resilience, social, economic, and cultural resilience as well. We've learned that you can't defend freedom by giving it up, Chin replied. Every authoritarian society claims they need to restrict liberty for security reasons. But we've discovered that free people who understand the cost of freedom are the most effective defenders of their own society. They stopped at a memorial in the town center, a simple stone monument listing names of local residents who had died in various conflicts throughout human history. What struck Vexterith was that most of the names were followed by civilian occupations: teacher, farmer, mechanic, doctor. These weren't professional soldiers, Chin said quietly. They were ordinary people who chose to fight when their way of life was threatened. That's why human military doctrine emphasizes individual initiative and adaptive thinking. We can't predict what threats we'll face, so we prepare everyone to think creatively under pressure. As they walked back toward the farm, Vexterith found himself thinking about the Coalition's approach to military service. Professional armies were efficient and disciplined, but they required extensive support from civilian populations who often had little understanding of military realities. When professional forces failed, civilian populations were largely defenseless. "Admiral," he said finally, "I believe I understand why Coalition tactical analysis struggled to predict human performance. We were looking for military excellence, but what you've achieved is civilizational excellence that includes military capability." Shin nodded. "That's exactly right. We don't train soldiers to protect civilians. We train civilians to protect civilization. When everyone understands both the value of what they're defending and the cost of losing it, they make better decisions under pressure." The next morning, Vexterith received an unexpected communication from Coalition headquarters. Supreme Military Commander was requesting an immediate conference regarding developing situations on multiple frontier worlds. The holographic display showed tactical information that made Vexterith's heart sink. 3 different Coalition member worlds were experiencing internal conflicts that threatened to destabilize entire sectors. Traditional Coalition response would involve deploying professional peacekeeping forces to suppress violence, but intelligence suggested that approach would likely fail. "General," Supreme Commander's ancient voice carried deep concern. "These situations require unconventional approaches. Standard peacekeeping doctrine appears inadequate for conflicts where civilian and military elements are deeply integrated." Vexterith studied the tactical data while Admiral Chun looked over his shoulder. What he saw confirmed his growing understanding of galactic politics. The conflicts weren't traditional military engagements that could be resolved through superior firepower. They were civilizational struggles where military action alone could not address underlying causes. "Sir," Vexterith said slowly, "I believe these situations require human-style intervention. Military force combined with humanitarian support, economic development, and long-term commitment to helping local populations build sustainable peace." "Are you suggesting Coalition forces adopt human tactical doctrine for peacekeeping operations?" Vexterith looked at Admiral Chun, who nodded encouragingly. "Sir, I'm suggesting that the Coalition needs to learn from humanity's approach to defending civilization. Military excellence isn't enough. We need civilizational excellence." There was a long pause before Supreme Commander responded. "General Vexterith, are you prepared to lead such operations? The Coalition Council has authorized formation of a new stabilization force, incorporating human tactical innovations. You would have unprecedented authority to implement whatever approaches you deem necessary." Vexterith felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Accept the position, and he would spend years trying to reform Coalition military doctrine based on human principles. Decline, and he would likely spend the rest of his life wondering whether different leadership might have prevented conflicts that traditional approaches couldn't resolve. "Sir," he said finally, "I accept the position on one condition. Admiral Chun and a core group of human officers must be assigned as tactical advisors. These innovations require human perspective to implement successfully." "Agreed." "Admiral Chun, will you accept assignment to the Coalition Stabilization Force?" Chen's response was characteristically direct. "Yes, sir. But I have one condition as well. Any operations must include significant humanitarian and development components. We're not just trying to stop fighting. We're trying to build sustainable peace." As the communication ended, Vexterith realized his military career had taken a direction he never could have imagined. Instead of commanding fleets to destroy enemies, he would be leading integrated forces to protect and develop struggling civilizations. 6 months later, standing on the bridge of his new flagship Unity of Purpose, Vexterith watched as human and coalition forces worked together to evacuate civilians from a war-torn world while simultaneously providing medical aid to all sides in the conflict. It was messy, complicated, and politically challenging work that couldn't be solved through superior firepower alone. But for the first time in his 3-century career, General Vexterith felt like he was fighting for something genuinely worth preserving. He had learned that the greatest military victory wasn't defeating enemies. It was creating conditions where enemies could become allies. As his mixed-species crew worked with characteristic human determination to save lives and build peace, Vexterith finally understood why he had been so drawn to Earth. These humans had shown him that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the commitment to protect and preserve what made life worth living. His resignation letter remained in his desk drawer, unsigned and forgotten. He had found something better than ending his career. He had found a way to give it meaning that would last long after the fighting stopped.